Good morning, everybody. Thank you for the invitation to be in here talking about communities, which is a topic that is well studied from anthropology. So I'm not an editor, I'm not a publisher, I'm not a writer, I'm an anthropologist, as Peter said. So when I say I'm an anthropologist, many times people imagine me doing something like this. Right? Traveling to very exotic places and sitting with lost tribes, trying to understand their cultures. And actually what I do is not that different, but I don't need to go to Africa or Latin America. I study people like us, people like you, and mostly I study consumers. And I share later their experiences and their stories with the businesses, right? So we can improve the customer experience. So as Peter said, we founded Antropología 2.0, which is the first business anthropology agency in Spain. And just a few examples, here we are studying home buying experience in the United States and how real estate culture is changing, or IKEA experience, the shopping experience in IKEA, or music festivals and the food selection that people have. So we bring the people's stories into the company, the voices of the people. And anthropologists, we love to use stories and history as well, because we think we can learn a lot about history, right? From the past and the present, we can better anticipate the future as well, to be prepared. And as companies and businesses, it's a very important thing. So I wanted to start with a short story or history about the concept of community. The concept of community has not always meant the same, has not always even been positive. Right now, mostly when we think about communities, we see it as a positive thing, right? But that has not always been the case. So let me quickly do this walk through this concept. So humans have always lived in communities. We are social animals, and we cannot live alone. Everything of humankind, all the progress, has been built through communities, okay? The very first types of communities were based around kinship, family-based, okay? These are simple type of communities. These are what anthropologists call clan. It's a clan, okay? Very basic in many ways, few roles, etc. When this families start growing, so there's extended family, there's new members, etc., etc. Groups of clans create a tribe. And tribes tend to be place-based. They are based in the territory, right? So you can use these concepts to just start ideating different ways in which you can conceptualize communities and think on creating communities. So also nowadays, there's a lot of territorially based communities. You can think maybe on your neighborhood community. You don't necessarily choose the people. You choose the place where you want to live, and therefore you end up building the community there, right? So these types of communities based on territory have lasted for very, very, very long. And of course it had its limits. People before did not move around, travel so much. And they were unknown. Like, for example, many people spoke different types of Spanishes back then, or different types of French, or different types of English, which made it that people, when they talked, sometimes they could not even understand each other, right? And if you cannot understand each other, you cannot build a community. So what changed that is something from your sector was the printer, right? The printer did that suddenly these people who spoke different types of Englishes or different types of French and were, not able to understand each other talking, suddenly they can understand each other by reading each other. And suddenly they become aware that there's this bigger collective amount of humans that are thinking and communicating in their same language. And that gave a broader sense of community that went beyond territory. And it's what some call the imagined communities, like nations. And they're imagined because, for instance, I'm Spanish, so I feel like I'm part of the Spanish community. And at the same time, I'm never going to meet the 40 million people that live in Spain, right? So I don't need to have the interaction to feel part of that community. Community has also been in the political, philosophical field, and so it has different, in each country it had different moments where this concept rised and decreased. But this is important to understand that it was not always positive. In many times when it was a concept used in politics, it was seen as more of a negative concept. And then it was with the first encyclopedia in the 18th century when we start talking about communities around practices. And Diderot described communities as those in a group that share a same art or profession. So they were talking about the guilds, right? So it's important to think about communities also as communities of practice. People who like, well, they've talked about sharing a passion, but it can a passion for doing certain things, right? And then I know Peter mentioned that he thinks that communities are not built around products, but I think products can be the excuse to build communities sometimes. And I brought this example, which is the kula. The kula is a ritual in the Pacific Islands, which they have a certain amount of jewelries, like necklaces made with beads, etc., and which have a sacred value, these products. And inhabitants from one island have these necklaces, and when they have them, there's like a certain pride. It's a level of high status just to have those beads in their property. But what's fascinating about the kula is that the important thing is not just to have them, but it's to share them. So every now and then, the community gets on a boat, travels to another island, and offers these products to another community in another island. Of course, then it's their time, they have this social status, etc. And then over the time, this other group of inhabitants travels to another island and offers it to another people. This product, the necklaces, is an excuse to build this community around all those islands. And of course, it's just an excuse to actually start business, start exchanging other products, exchanging culture, etc. But initially, it's all built around the product. So there is also communities that are product-based, we could say. And then with internet, well, communities have become a whole different thing. I brought this image because I think it's very good to describe how communities work in a sense. This is when we analyze, we do digital anthropology, and we start analyzing, for example, this is from Twitter. We were understanding how different followers of different Twitter accounts were interacting with each other. And as you see, each color represents a small community. And the smaller circles are the members, the people who are interacting in those communities. So I want you to keep in mind this image, because you see some little circles are like not touching anyone else. And then there's other little circles, which are people, that are they're connected to more than one community, to more than one group. These are the types of individuals, of people you want to be paying attention when you're building communities, because they are able to spread out a lot faster the types of values and ideas or products that you want to share, because they won't stay in one community. They are leaders that are capable of influencing a lot of different groups. Internet it's fascinating for the creation of communities, of course, and with the horizon of concepts like community manager, which maybe before it wasn't something that people would say, well, I'm a community manager. And it helped people build communities that before were difficult for them to find a community. So people that have passions, but for things that are kind of rare, let's say, So this is also good business opportunities because they represent what people call the blue oceans, right? These are consumers that don't have many offers for their types of passions. So just a couple of strange ones. There's a big community of elevator lovers. I don't know if you know it out there. These are not necessarily technicians, they're not necessarily people in the sector of elevators, but they just for some reason have a passion for elevators and through internet found a platform, a channel in which to exchange their pictures and their comments about the elevators they ride on. Another peculiar community, they're called the bronies, and these are adult men who love My Little Pony. And this is real, a fact, you can look it up. Again, like Peter showed us, they found them in internet, they found themselves in internet and starting relating there. But what's important is that they went on offline as well. And they started creating events and they started actually doing a one-on-one personal human contact. So why did I show you all of these different types of understanding communities and different perspectives? Well, because I knew we were going to be talking about 3 C's, no? Consumer, content, and collaboration. And I wanted to add another C, which for me is very important as an anthropologist. I think we always have to consider the context. Context is everything. Context can change dramatically when something like a sign you do, depending on where you are or what times it is. So just as we've seen the concept of community has changed, I want you to bear in mind when you're working in these next 2 days and in the future, when you're thinking of building communities, you have to think on what context are we inhabiting? And how does that influence the type of communities we want to build, right? So briefly, maybe sharing some ideas of the context that we live in nowadays. And maybe some of you know already this concept. They say we live in VUCA. I don't know if you've heard that before. This is a concept that actually comes from the US Army, but now it's spread and used in a lot of different environments. And what this means is that we live in a time of volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. We need to have this in mind when we are creating communities. Things are not as they used to be before. Things are not rigid, they're not permanent, they're in continuous change. Also, like Sigmund, the philosopher, also called it liquid times. Maybe that resonates more to you, which means we always have to be in a very flexible posture, always in constant change and listening to what's happening out there, listening to the consumers, being in touch with them. We cannot just try to build something and leave it and go. It's permanently being created, okay? So how does this affect your consumers? As I said, we have to avoid rigid structures. And this is how structures have traditionally been. Most of the last decades, almost a century. This structure maybe resonates with you for something. Maybe makes you think of how your classroom was organized when you were studying at school. Or maybe it looks like your business organigramma, you know. These types of structures are no longer going to exist. People actually behave more like this. People come, go, are moving, are interacted in more than one ways, not just in linear directions. But actually people are more like this, or this is where we're going. So people want to be interconnected. They don't want hierarchy structures. Also, Peter was saying people don't want the companies to be telling them what to do. They trust each other. They want this peer-to-peer review. They want to listen to others like them. So start thinking on how we can develop communities in this way, okay? And of course, also both presenters before me, they've been talking a lot about the people, so we have to start with the people. And yes, we always say that too when I'm working with my clients and I tell them, start with the people, think on the people, right? And many times they think on people like this, right? And so for me, you know, I visit a lot of people's houses, that's what I do, so this image just feels kind of uncomfortable. There's a lot of things there that is like, something's wrong there. It's like, first of all, what house do you go to nowadays that there's 4 people from 2 different generations happily watching the same content? No, not happening. Second, whoever has children knows that you don't have little children and a white sofa with, you know, no spillings, popcorn. Nobody even digged into the popcorn. What's going on there? Yeah, this is not real people. So if we want to build communities, if we want to satisfy our consumers, we have to start looking at real people. So actually, this is a bit more what people look like, you know? Increasingly, the house style that is growing faster is of single people living alone. That's what's growing faster. So that's also an interesting insight. We're thinking about building communities. We know we live in this online internet world where everybody can be connected, yet we are increasingly being unconnected, unplugged, and living alone in big apartments in big cities. There's a lot of clutter in most of people's actual real life. There's complexity, there's mess, you know, things are not clean, things are not easy. So yeah, we have to start thinking on the actual real people. And if we don't, we'll be making big mistakes as companies. There's a lot of examples. I like to quickly mention one, and it's the Nokia case. So many of you probably remember that Nokia was a leader in the market in phones back then. And they had an ethnographer who was doing research in China at the time, and her name is Tricia Wang, and she told Nokia, listen, you're not getting this right. You're thinking on like high class people with a lot of money, like executives, you're making the phones for them, but actually real people in the emerging markets in China and India, they're willing to, you know, have to pay their phone in a year or 2 years, but they all want to have smartphones. This was, you know, back in 2009, I think. And Nokia was like, no, our big data does not show that. You know, all of our revenue, their big revenue comes from selling these phones to executives, etc. So they were not looking at actually the big amount, the big mass of real people, not just a small elite group. And so, well, the rest is history. Nobody knows anything about Nokia's phones anymore. So also taking advantage of this image, I would like to also point out that when you build communities around a brand or around a product, it's not just to use the brand or the product is just an excuse to add all other cultural elements. That's what actually sticks people together. So, for example, think about Apple. You know, there's the Apple community, right? Many of you probably have an iPhone in your pocket. Many of you maybe are, you know, Mac defenders from some time back. But being an Apple lover or being part of the Apple community does not imply only to have an iPhone on your phone. It implies that you have a certain shared beliefs, such as Apple products don't have viruses. You share a certain values, like preference for quality and innovation. You share some practices, such as going to the Apple store, being aware of the new product. You share some tastes, like aesthetics takes, like for minimalism, design, etc. So it's all these other shared beliefs, practices, values that actually create the community. You're actually building a culture. It's much more than just a phone or a brand. So just to sum up some of the ideas that I want you to take for the next days. When you have a challenge in your company, try to switch your business questions to human questions. And that will give you another look into what you're trying to solve. So for instance, the challenge that we're tackling here these days, if we want to think maybe on how can we sell more books, let's start by thinking, how are people learning nowadays? Where are people looking for the information? Or why do people that buy books nowadays? Let's start with those type of questions. Let's avoid the top-down strategies. As I showed before, the network kind of style of format. Let's try to go through this type of multi-directional, interconnected relationships. Consider the context always. Context where you're building a community, the context where you want to spread it, what it means there. Consider the personal goals, but also consider the shared goals, which means, yes, to build a community, you need people that are sharing some goals. So that could be avoiding pollution in the planet, could be. But there's also personal goals. For people to actually get involved in that community, they have to have a personal goal to be there. And it could be anything. It can be you're new in the city, so you want to socialize and meet new people, so you join a community. It can be you need a need for recognition. It can be you want to expand your business. But you have to consider those two elements, not only the group goals. And last, I would like all of you to sometimes remember me and feel a little bit like an anthropologist. Look at people, explore, ask them questions. People love to talk. People love to be asked, actually. Ask them questions and think of them kind of as tribes. Think of them in a holistic point of view. Think about their values, think about their beliefs, the type of relationships they build. Think about all these elements and how they affect the way we live in community as tribes that we are. Thank you very much.